The views expressed on Skeptically Speaking are not necessarily the views of this station, its affiliates, sponsors, or advertisers.
Bring it on, the skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is, cause we're skeptically speaking.
Hello and welcome to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Shell. This week we'll look at the connection between magic and critical thinking. We're joined by magicians Jamy Ian Swiss and Brian Brushwood. They'll tell us what magic can teach us about the way our brains work and how you can spot the strategies of deception. But first, let's speak to performer Michael Goudeau about his work as a writer and producer on the TV projects of magicians Penn Teller. I'm on the line with Michael Goudeau, professional comedy juggler and entertainer. He started out doing street shows in San Francisco in 1976. He worked as a clown with the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus and spent 19 years as the guest variety artist in magician Lance Burton's show in Las Vegas.
You just can't ever get rid of that clown tag, can you? It just sticks to you like the smell of elephants.
Well, we also do have the fact that you worked for 8 years as a writer and executive producer on Penn Teller's television show.
Yes.
Bullshit. So first things first, what exactly is a comedy juggler?
Well, it's someone who's not skilled enough to be a regular juggler. There's no way I could stand on stage in a spangly outfit and do tricks that would entertain anyone for 15 minutes. And so I talk and do jokes and mess around.
How did you turn that into a career?
Yeah, that's an odd question, isn't it? I wanted to be a forest ranger, actually. I was going to college to become a forest ranger, and I grew up just outside of San Francisco and saw some other guys doing a juggling show at a Renaissance fair, and my dad had bought me a book on how to juggle, and I thought, boy, that looks like fun. And so I just started doing it. You know, I just went to a street fair and started doing shows and passing the hat.
And then somewhere in there, you went from that to, well, you're still doing that. You went from that to writing and producing bullshit.
Yes, which is an odd turn of events. As it turns out, the variety arts community, the variety artists are like magicians and jugglers, ventriloquists and mimes and clowns, all those people. It's a pretty small community. And I was doing street shows in San Francisco at the time when Penn Teller were part of a 3-person show called the Asparagus Valley Cultural Society. And I went to their show and introduced myself afterwards to Penn Gillette, who said, "You can't be a juggler. You're not dressed like a hippie." So, well, no, I know I'm not dressed like a hippie, but I am honestly a juggler. And we became friends. And then, it must have been 15 years after that they got a show on the FX channel called the Sin City Spectacular, which was a variety arts show. And they asked all of their friends who lived in Vegas to come in for a week and write jokes to help them, because they had to do 24 one-hour shows in a pretty short amount of time. So they had all their friends come in, all the local magicians and jugglers all came in for a week and hung out and tried to write bits that Penn Teller could do on the show, just suggesting any crazy ideas that you had. And at the end of the week, they said, "Thank you, everybody. You're allowed to go home." And I just never left. I hung around and kept coming back every day and suggesting bits for them, just because it was so much fun. At that time, what we did was we would go out to lunch and we would sit and we would talk about bits and we would laugh and try to create something that they could do. And I came up with a bit for them for Super Dave Osborne, who was going to be a guest on the show.
Oh, my.
I suggested cut and restored rock climbing rope for Super Dave Osborne. And they said, "Oh, you know what? That might work. Go see if you can find a place that will let us film this." And there was a new rock climbing wall on Las Vegas Boulevard. And I went down and talked to those people. And they said, "Okay, terrific, if you'll advertise for us." And we went in and shot the whole thing. And I did all the rigging so that all the showgirls could be hanging up on the rock climbing wall. And so that Penn Teller would be safe. And so that Super Dave could be dropped without being killed. And at the end of that day, they said, "You know what? We're just going to hire you to stay with us."
That definitely does actually sound like training ground for the bullshit series. So, for our listeners who might not have seen it, can you tell us about the show?
It's a Skeptic series on Showtime. It's one of 2 Skeptic TV shows in the world, the first being, of course, Scooby-Doo. And we just examine people's beliefs and try to do it in an interesting and factual manner. As Penn likes to say, it's a very opinionated show, but extremely fact-based.
So Penn and Teller are stage magicians, and
Yes.
historically there have been a lot of magicians who've campaigned publicly against sort of scams and charlatans.
Sure. Magicians are the best equipped to catch someone at that type of trickery. They spend their entire lives studying how to fool people, and so when they see people doing it and claiming it's real, a lot of them get mad.
So do you see this show as part of the tradition?
Bullshit is absolutely part of that tradition. It passes straight back down to Houdini. And we, in fact, did episodes on some of the things that Houdini hated, like people who claim to talk to the dead, and really not the talking to the dead part that's so odd. It's the fact that they claim the dead are talking back to them. We are definitely in that vein.
Was the goal mostly to debunk popular myths, or were you trying to teach people how they might sniff out the BS on their own?
Unfortunately, like all television entertainment, the goal was to sell soap.
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking, and my guest is professional juggler Michael Goudeau, who was the writer and executive producer of Penn and Teller's television show, Bullshit. So, who came up with that concept?
You know what? I was not actually involved in the earliest steps of this. Thank goodness. They called me and said, "We have sold a TV show. We would like you to come in and work with us as a writer." We worked for a couple of months writing, preparing the show. And then on the first day of actual shooting of the show, someone from Showtime came in and said, "Penn and Teller, we have a problem with this specific bit." And Penn and Teller said, "Well, you'll have to speak to Goudeau. He's our guy in charge of this kind of thing." And they said, "We're not going to talk to him. He's a writer." And Penn said, No, he's also the executive producer."
That's really how that happened.
That's literally how that happened. So I was, no, he's executive producer. Now you have to argue with him.
Oh, that is brilliant.
If you know anything about me, I'm pretty non-confrontational, so it was a tough step for me.
Well, how did you pick the topics that you covered on the show?
We would make a list every year of probably 30 or 40 that we just felt, gosh, this is going to be great. We're going to do this. And then we would send that to Showtime, and they would pick their favorite 10 or 12. And then that would come back to us, and those would be the 12 we would do that year.
What were some of your favorites?
The favorite ones are not always the ones that were the most successful, but the ones that were most successful were, we did one on bottled water, which has become, of course, a big fuss at this point. Some of the ones that I didn't realize were that recycling, when we started doing the math on the recycling, it didn't actually make sense for most things.
Right.
It's just weird. You
Yeah.
go, what? That can't be right. What? So, a few of them were things that I didn't know anything about, and a few of them were things that I did. So it was great. It was really fun. The bottled water was great because we went to a Los Angeles restaurant, a fancy restaurant, and it had a water sommelier that we hired an actor to play a water sommelier who would come in and talk in snotty terms about the different waters that we had. And all of the waters were filled from a hose in the back of the restaurant.
That was a great episode.
Well, and part of it was that the guy who played it, and I wish I knew his name, he was so convincing and funny and smarmy. And people, I would like to try the Amazon. It has a spider in it. It's direct from the Amazon water or glacier water. And then people would take a sip, and we would ask them to describe it, and they would go to great lengths to use flowery language like you would with wines. And everyone swore they could tell the differences. No, this is the glacier water. I can tell because it's clean and clear. It's very smooth and clear aftertaste.
Did that surprise you at all?
Yes, I feel like I can tell the difference in water. You know what I mean? You taste bottled water. Some of them taste great, some of them don't. And yet, apparently, when on camera, no one can tell.
We are very easy to market to, sir.
I guess.
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking, and I'm talking to Michael Goudeau, writer and executive producer on Penn and Teller's television show, Bullshit. We'll be right back after this.
Skeptically Speaking wants you to question everything. To be a part of the discussion, call and record your question on our listener question line at Speak 73101. That's 773-257-3101. Long-distance charges may apply. Sunday nights at 6 Mountain Time, join our Ustream chat room to listen and ask questions as we record interviews live. Just click the Listen Online button at skepticallyspeaking.com. You can also email your questions and comments to live@skepticallyspeaking.com, or if you're on Twitter, tweet us at Skeptical Radio. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Schell, and my guest is Michael Goudeau, professional comedy juggler and entertainer who worked for 8 years as a writer and executive producer on Penn Teller's television show, Bullshit. Did the network ever tell you that you couldn't do a show on a particular topic?
You know, they weren't keen on us doing Scientology, but They didn't say no. When we started talking about Scientology, we thought, you know what, there are really, I mean, how many Scientologists are there? There just aren't that many, and to spend time on a national show talking about them was just kind of silly.
Interesting.
It'd be like, doing a show just on things that people don't actually believe in. And we really wanted some pushback from people, and we knew we weren't going to get it from them, so...
That's not the perspective I hear from a lot of people.
I know, but the reality is very few people are Scientologists. You know what I mean? Just because they're big names, people get fussy about it. But when it comes down to it, the percentage is exactly zero. So,
well, how much research do you usually do to prepare for an episode?
A huge amount. I spend a lot of time reading and checking, and we also have a crew of people in Los Angeles who do work and do the interviews and stuff for us. And, they do the first round of research, and then they send us stuff, and then we look at it to make sure it's all true. We're really, really careful. In fact, I believe the only factually incorrect thing we did on the show was that we made a joke, and really honestly just a joke, about witches being burned in Salem, and there were no witches burned.
Right.
And so in 8 seasons of basically 100 shows, we got one fact wrong.
This is something that's actually been brought up before. Now, Penn Jillette, in particular, is well known for having pretty strong political views. So how much of the show was informed by that perspective?
Well, we were driving to have a highly opinionated, fact-based show, and so we were going with Penn's political beliefs, and Teller's political beliefs were important to the show, and so we were perfectly fine shouting opinions, which is in fact part of the obscenity of the show. Opinions in obscenity, legally, an obscenity can be used and not considered a legal liability. So if you said, this doctor's a quack, well, you'd be in trouble. But if you said if you called him any name in the world, that was perfectly acceptable legally. One of the odd things was getting notes from Showtime saying, you need to swear more.
That is a very clever way around that.
It is an odd, funny way around it, because an obscenity is an opinion, where if you were to say quack, that would be considered a libel.
Now, I assume some of this is going to carry over to your new show, because Bullshit recently wrapped up after 8 seasons on Showtime. Yep. Now, there were rumors that there was something about the Catholic Church pressuring the network to cancel your show. Is that what happened?
Was it true that they were doing it? Well, you have to, again, be very, very specific about this. There's one guy, we call it the Catholic League, and his wife, who claims to speak for all Catholics, who was constantly trying to stop the show because he just was a grumpy old man, as far as I can tell. But officially the church, no, not in any way. And in fact, we were asked to do more seasons on Showtime, and we've got a new show on a basic cable channel, which has a following about 10 times bigger. So we're actually moving by choice.
So tell us about this new show. I'm very excited.
Ooh, me too. It is called Penn Teller's Secrets of the Universe. It's not like Bullshit. It's not going to be a skeptical show. It's a science show. And we're going to talk about little-known facts and hard-to-believe things that are true in the universe. It's an hour-long show rather than the half-hour format. Right. Each show will have about somewhere between 6 and 10 segments about things that you don't really quite know or can't quite believe. And in each show, there will be one fake segment. So we'll be talking about, this is a way that you can land an airplane with the doors in case the steering goes out, and we'll be making stuff up.
That is great, though. People need to know that information.
Yeah. We say that a lot during the show. We'll say, One of these is fake, because what we're trying to encourage is critical thinking skills. And, we joke during the show, this is an open book test. If you want to look it up on the internet, you can. Because really, the internet's a difficult place to gather facts, and it's very, very easy to put up something false. We could put up we found the unicorn finally website, and when you went to look online, you'd find it. The internet's very easy to manipulate in this way. So we've decided to do a show that asks you to use your head without it.
So how are you involved then?
Well, I am once again a writer on the show. I don't know if I'm executive producer yet. We haven't had to fight with anyone.
And when does it premiere?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I know when I have to be done, but I don't know when it airs. It will be on the Discovery Network, and I believe it's on Thursday nights following the Mythbusters.
Now that is some timing, sir.
That's a good time spot, isn't it? And we're such Mythbuster fans that it's great.
I have one more question to ask.
Okay.
Now, we were introduced to you by a friend and former guest, Carl Mamer,
yes,
of the Conspiracy Skeptic podcast, and he said that we couldn't let you go without asking you about your pancake project.
Oh, thank you, Carl. If Carl's listening. Yes, I have sold a book, as impossible as this seemed. If you go to thepancakeproject.com, I don't know if you've gone, you can see
I have.
I make pancake art. It's not recipes. It's not delicious pancakes. It is pictures.
It is pretty pancakes.
It's pretty pancakes. So I've made like Edvard Munch's The Scream out of pancake batter, and I have achieved the different tones in the painting by leaving the batter on the griddle longer or shorter amounts of time.
There is really something in this world for everyone. Honestly.
I've sold it as a book. Barnes & Noble will be putting it out. Sterling Press. It will be out in September.
And everybody can take a look at that. It's thepancakeproject.com if you'd like more information.
Thank you.
And Michael, thanks very much for being here.
It's very much my pleasure, Desiree.
You can find links to Michael Goudeau and his various projects on our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. And we'll be right back with Jamy Ian Swiss and Brian Brushwood to talk about what magic can teach us about critical thinking after this.
Skeptically Speaking is rebroadcast on a number of fine radio stations. To find out where Skeptically Speaking airs near you, to listen to past episodes, or download the weekly podcast, check out our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. While you're there, follow the links to connect with us on our Facebook page, our Twitter feed, or to subscribe to the show in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
Hello and welcome to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Schell. Today we'll be talking about magic and critical thinking, and I have two fantastic guests to walk us through it. First, we have Jamy Ian Swiss. Now, according to comedy magic duo Penn and Teller, Jamy Ian Swiss is James Bond with a deck of cards for a pistol. He's a magician, author, and public speaker, and he's presented internationally for audiences ranging from Fortune 500 companies to the Smithsonian. He's also appeared on PBS Nova, The Today Show, and The Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson. Welcome to the show, Jamy.
It's great to be here.
So how did you get interested in magic in the first place?
Well, the same way that pretty much every red-blooded American boy, typically boys, but also some girls, gets involved. We all really start the same way. It's typically sometime between the ages of 7 and 10. Somebody gives us a magic kit, or we read a book on Houdini, and we start to dabble with magic for the next few years. Later on, at the age of 15 or 16 or so, most people sort of, discover the opposite sex and move on and go out and have a life. And I stayed home and practiced, and I don't know why that was, but that's what happened.
Adam Savage, when he was on our show, actually said that the only way to get really good at something is to first obsess.
I agree with that. Adam once pointed out to me that we all know that line about the jack of all trades and master of none. But what many of us don't know is the next line in the poem. And the next line is, but often better than master of one.
Ooh.
And Adam is a perfect example of that, a guy who, like myself, is self-taught largely and, has unbelievable skills in a multitude of areas that all come out of a kind of personal obsession and ultimately mastery.
Well, speaking of skills, also with us today is Brian Brushwood. He's the author of The Professional's Guide to Fire Eating and Cheats, Cons, Swindles, and Tricks, 57 Ways to Scam a Free Drink. He is perhaps best known as the creator and host of Scam School, which was named by iTunes as a top video podcast of 2008 and 2009. Welcome, Brian.
Oh my gosh, it is so awesome to be here. Thank you for having me.
What's your story? How did you become a magician?
I had that same passing interest that I think most kids had in magic, but it wasn't until I went to college and a friend of mine showed me a card trick and wouldn't tell me how it was done. So it was out of sheer jealousy and rage that I decided I would be a better magician than he ever was. So I spent a few months learning card tricks, but then things really went downhill when I actually figured out you could get paid to walk around and do card tricks. And, I finished my degree and I was always doing magic on the side. In fact, I managed to scam my way into doing a magic show as a creative writing thesis. And then finally there came to that decision like, well, I'll give it 1 year. I'll see if I can make this crazy magic thing work. And 2 years later, I was on The Tonight Show and I've been touring colleges ever since.
Very nice, sir. So you're both prominent magicians, but you're also well known for promoting critical thinking. So, Brian, first of all, tell us about Scam School.
We call Scam School the show about social engineering at the bar and on the street, which is essentially a fancy way of saying using magic and trickery to screw your friends at a beer at the bar. We try to put people in the role of actually doing these tricks. Every single thing we do on Scam School, we want it to be something that very night, even after having a few drinks and building up your courage, you can run out and try this and have a reasonable chance of success. And my hope with it is that in the background, we're able to build up the tools of skepticism that most magicians already have. Once you spend some time fooling other people, you kind of become wise. You get a pretty good BS detector.
And Jamy, you've referred to yourself as the honest liar. Explain that.
At the turn of the 20th century, a famous American magician named Carl Germain said that the magician, a conjurer, is the most honest of all professions because the conjurer first promises to deceive and then does. And so as a magician, I really am an honest liar because the moment I use that term magician or anything like it, I'm really stating a very clear social contract with my audience, which basically says that for the next little while, I'm going to fool you. But it's okay because I'm telling you and I'm going to bring you back at the end to a place not significantly altered, once you began. And that's the difference. That social contract is all the difference in the world between someone like Brian and myself or someone like a John Edward or some other con man who's really trying to use the tools of our honest deception to change how people live their lives or think about how the world or the universe works. And that leaves people walking out of the theater more poorly equipped to live their lives effectively rather than better.
Are you two activist magicians? Would you call yourself that?
I would call myself kind of a loud, annoying braggart on the side cheering for one of the two sides. Not so much willing to actually get out there on the field.
Jamy?
Oh, I am. I've been a skeptical activist for close to 30 years now. I helped start 2 regional skeptic groups, the New York City Skeptics just a couple of years ago, and 20 years before that, the National Capital Area Skeptics in Washington, D.C. I've done presentations on behalf of the Center for Inquiry all around the country. I've written for Skeptic Magazine, and perhaps most importantly, I'm a longtime colleague of James Randi and the James Randi Educational Foundation. I've presented, performed, or otherwise moderated, otherwise been involved in virtually every one of the Amazing Meeting, the annual critical thinking conference that the Randi Foundation puts on in Las Vegas, the world's largest skeptic conference. And so I'm sort of deeply involved in that world.
Now, you aren't the first activist magician. Maybe give us a bit of history there.
There is a long-standing history between critical thinking and magic. In the published record, it goes back 4 centuries. The first book that ever included explanations or instructions in magic in English was a book called The Discovery of Witchcraft by Reginald Scott, which was published in 1584. Now, this was not a book about magic. It was a book of critical thinking. It was a book that was skeptical of the witch burnings during Jamesian England. Basically, the author is saying, I'm not so sure that the evidence that's being presented on behalf of convicting these witches is really sufficient. And he included a brief chapter, about 22 pages, about how magic tricks work. And he did it with the help of a French magician who was working in London at the time. And his point was to demonstrate how easily people could be fooled with the magician's skills, and also the fact that these tricks were not evidence of witchcraft. So that's 4 centuries just in the written record, and we can imagine that it actually dates back further than that. And that history going forward from that time, if we jump ahead most dramatically perhaps to the mid-19th century and the birth of modern spiritualism, spirit mediums, seances, and so forth, by the turn of the century, the most visible vocal critics of that movement, both here and in Great Britain, were magicians, notably Harry Houdini, who, along with Scientific American magazine, helped create the first committee on parapsychological research, which offered a reward for any paranormal event that couldn't be explained or demonstrated through normal means. And that in and of itself is a tradition that then has been continued by James Randi, who not only has spent his life challenging psychics of all sorts, but today, the foundation, we offer $1 million prize for anyone who can demonstrate a paranormal ability.
Jamy, that is the most succinct historical explanation I've ever heard. Thank you. So, we often hear that stage magic can teach us a lot about our own cognitive limitations. So what limitations would those be?
One of the biggest things that shocked me as a performer was hearing people describe to me the show that I just performed for them. Now, we're talking less than an hour after they watched these events happen. People already were having a hard time remembering what happened in what order. And then when I come back a year later, the stories would be so outrageous and so ridiculous, and people would be so certain that this is exactly what they saw. They're like, no, you took that 5-inch nail and you put it in your eye and it came out the other eye. And you're like, no, you're thinking of the 5-inch nail I put in my nose, and the separate trick where I took a 1-inch nail and put it in my eye. And they're like, no, I'm pretty sure it was a 5-inch nail in your eye. And that was a big part of why, fully a third of the Scam Sasquatch and the Supernatural lecture that I do at colleges is dedicated to the work of Elizabeth Loftus. And I think if there's one underreported aspect of human intelligence that I wish everybody could fully understand is not only are we bad with our memories, but we're so fabulously bad that we invent stuff that definitely never occurred. And as a magician, to see firsthand over and over and over again, to have people describe, they mix up the order of the events. And so the story is more fantastical than what I actually performed. If people could learn that aspect of their own brains, if they could come to know their own limitations and the fact that not only do they not remember everything, but the stuff they do remember most likely is 100% false, then I think we would make tremendous steps forward as far as discounting the credibility of eyewitness testimony or all the things. Unfortunately, statistically speaking, the stuff that we should rely the least on is what seems to matter to people the most.
That's
Jamy?
a really great point, and we're very much in agreement on that, Brian, and that interest, especially in how it affects the court system. The larger implications of this, obviously, as Brian's indicated, go far beyond magic shows. And it's not just about people's memory. Elizabeth Loftus has done this wonderful work about implanted memories and work that helped debunk the extraordinary claims of so-called recovered memory, which destroyed a lot of lives in the 80s. But the larger lesson, if I may, is that human beings are terrible observers. And that has nothing to do with intellect or intelligence, just as if you're fooled by a magician. I always say being fooled is not the same as being a fool. I don't get paid to fool, stupid people. I get paid to fool everybody, including the smart folks. And that's because magicians use, in skillful ways, knowledge about how people think and how people observe against you in ways that, in most of the rest of our lives, are actually advantageous to humans, but can also be used against you by liars, both honest and dishonest. But the point of this idea that we're all awful observers, this speaks to the importance of the scientific method. And really, so much of the benefits of modern life are dated in such a short amount of time coming out of the scientific method, which really dates from the time of Leonardo, and we're talking a few centuries. And, of course, if you narrow it down, or even a modern medical science, what are we talking about? We're really talking, we've almost doubled lifespan in only 100 years. And before that, we didn't know that we should wash our hands in the surgery room. So in order to beat this terrible observational skills that we have, these terrible limitations, This is why you have to invent the scientific method. And hand in hand with the scientific method comes one of its fundamental tools, which is the idea of the double-blind test. Because basically the double-blind test takes the subjective experience, and to the greatest extent possible, it removes it from the process of observation. As natural observers, many of us grow up at least thinking that, when the phone rings and we suddenly get a feeling of who it is and we're right, we remember that as a dramatic experience. And that's because we're not keeping track of all the times we missed. You don't get anywhere with the scientific method based on your own subjective anecdotal experience. And it's counterintuitive for us, for humans. It's a very difficult idea to put aside your own personal experience and put some other abstract version of it ahead. But actually, that is the nature of the scientific method, and it's really the only way that we find out what is and is not happening in the world.
Brian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I did actually, and I think he's absolutely right. I mean, the double-blind double-blind peer-reviewed study is, of course, the gold standard of science. But specifically, hearing Jamie's comments made me think of a lot of the work that the author Michael Crichton was doing shortly before he died. One of the things in a speech he gave, he talked about how, and forgive me if I get all the details wrong. I know we have super smart PhDs out there who know. But the way he described it is that the FDA, it's so important to make sure that you remove all bias from not only, from interpretation of the data, from recording of the data. So you have entirely different groups who never get a chance to meet each other. And if the two of them accidentally meet each other, they have to report it, and there's a chance their findings may be invalidated just because the two of them happen to be on the same plane together, where you have to have one group do all the testing, another group collect all the data, and then still another group test all the data or interpret the data. And he actually felt like it was very important that you go even farther, and he feels like what we need is double blinding for the funding behind these, because so often if you have a project that's funded by Big Oil, of course you get the results that say what Big Oil wants it to say. If you have it funded by the WWF, you get what the World Wildlife Fund would want to see. And there have been tests where even given the exact same random set of data, people who are predisposed to believe in ESP will make mistakes favoring the ESP outcome as opposed to the skeptical outcome. So I think not only is it correct, but I think there's still even more fields to go into to find out just how many biases that we still have that need to be removed.
You're listening to Skeptically Speaking. I'm talking about magic and critical thinking with Brian Brushwood, the creator of Scam School, and sleight-of-hand master Jamy Ian Swiss. And we have many, many questions already. We'll get to the first one here. It's a question from Sarah C. How do you, as magicians, build a working knowledge of cognitive limitations? Is it all by observation, or do you keep up on the research about neuroscience and how the brain works? Have you ever created a new trick specifically to exploit something new that you've learned about the brain?
I'm going to jump in here for a moment, if I may, because as it happens, when you talk about neuroscience and magic, there is a new book by Stephen Macknick and Susanna Martinez-Conde called Sleight-of-Hand. It's just recently been released, what the neuroscience of magic reveals about our everyday deceptions. Macknick and Martinez-Conde are neuroscientists who have become interested in magic and what it reveals about the neuroscience of the brain and perception. And this is a brand new area in some ways. It's controversial in some ways. And what I would say in answer to the question is that magicians have been hands-on psychologists for millennia. And, the cups and balls, a classic magician's trick, is reported by Seneca, who saw it in 64 A.D., and there's a lot of psychology involved in the sleight of hand behind the cups and balls. So what's happening now in terms of science becoming interested in this is they're trying to parse out little pieces of what magicians do and see what it can tell them about their respective sciences in scientific terms. Now, this is very interesting, but I actually think that magicians have more to inform the scientists about than the scientists have to inform us. The scientists are not going to discover a new neuroscientific principle that magicians are going to newly exploit. It's going to be more the other way around. There's some principle that magicians have been using for centuries, and the scientists may bring us some understanding of it beyond the sort of, toolkit, hands-on use that magicians are aware of. And that's good. but that's a separate thing from art, because magic is a performing art, and it's built from many, many little elements, only parts of which have to do with things like visual perception, as opposed to other parts that have to do with mental reception, because magicians are fond of saying, for example, that, it's not really that the hand is quicker than the eye. It's just, as my friend Bill puts it, the eye sees a lot of things the mind never notices. And magic doesn't really occur out on the stage or in my hands. It actually occurs solely in one place, and that's in the perceptions of the audience.
With all due respect, I'm going to disagree only slightly. I think you're right in that magicians have intuitively been exploiting the back doors of the human brain for years, but I suspect what's happening is that right now I think we are in the dwindling phase of deception as an art. There was a time 10,000 years ago that, farming was an art and it wasn't considered a science. And people, they knew nothing of Punnett squares or microbiology or any number of other things, but they knew intuitively that, well, we tried doing it this way, and it seems like when we crossbreed these plants, we seem to get them about this size, and it was very much considered an art. But nowadays, it is very top-down. It's now, in an era of genetically modified crops, it's very much a science, and there's no more art to farming. And I suspect that we are seeing the dawn of something similar in magic. I think
And so what would be the relationship between farming and, say, painting?
Of course, when it comes to painting and storytelling, that's one thing. But if we're talking about the potency of deception, there's fantastic research, stuff that nobody had figured out before, stuff like the concept of change blindness. We are gaining more tools and more backdoors in order to warp the perception of people in the audience so that we can tell more interesting stories. Just as the addition of computer-generated effects hasn't fundamentally altered the storytelling aspects of movies, but it certainly has allowed for new types of movies to be told that couldn't be done before.
Yeah, I don't think those are significant changes at all. And in fact, it was artists who discovered the psychology of perspective centuries ahead of scientists. And the fact that scientists can now explain to you the geometry and neuroscience of the perception of perspective will, I suspect, have absolutely zero impact on painters' use of perspective and how it's reflected in art. And I would say that's exactly the same impact that the neuroscience of perception will have on the art of magic.
And again, I think we're talking across purposes here, because I'm not talking about the art of storytelling or what we do with magic. Right now, the source of discovery of the gaps of perception has been the intuitive fumbling of magicians for, 10,000 years. And I'm saying that now that there's a concerted effort and we're seeing some really interesting research come, I think we're going to start seeing magicians who are writing routines to take advantage of new backdoors that are discovered from the scientific side of things.
I'll bet you a beer on that.
All right, I'll take you up on that. We'll see.
I was actually going to suggest a cage match, but it really doesn't work as well on the radio as it could. Now we have a question from Bill M. What are your own blind spots in regards to critical thinking?
I'm going to say this isn't just me in general. I think people in general. I think we all have political blind spots. There is no double-blind standard for what is the right decision politically or philosophically for the direction of, if you're pro-market or you're pro-government or you're pro-freedom or pro-state. And I know that it's interesting, especially here in the skeptical movement, to see, for example, a lot of very prominent skeptics tend to be libertarian, myself included, and of course, Penn Teller. And I wonder how that colors things to me. To me, I regard libertarianism as the closest thing to evidence-based politics, in that it's a matter of, the free market has, demonstrably time over time been more productive than any kind of central planning. And so that's probably the right thing, all things being equal. But it leads me into weird moments of confusion where I'm very quick to say, well, this is outside of my realm, but my gut says blank. I don't know that just recognizing a blind spot necessarily helps you do anything to it, but that's definitely a personal blind spot that I've noticed lately.
Jamie?
Well, I think that libertarianism, for the record, is a pseudoscience.
We're totally going to have a cage match, right?
I know. This is getting heavy right now.
But paranormal claims of that nature aside, I think that no one gets a real pass on the way human minds work. Randy often likes to tell of the fact that you can be amongst an extremely rational group of people, everyone who seems to be on the same page, and then there's always the person who says, except for this one thing. And then they'll come up with their one experience, whether it's precognitive dream or, it could be anything, this one sort of odd claim that fits outside of that framework. But often it's based, again, on the myth of personal validation. That's part of the problem, as I indicated earlier in talking about the scientific method. I just recently heard a talk from Catherine Schultz, who's written a new book called Being Wrong, Adventures in the Margin of Error. And it talks about how human beings respond to, for example, the experience of being wrong and why it's difficult to change people's minds. There's an interesting study a couple of years ago that when people hear a news story that contradicts something they believe in, rather than question their belief in it, they tend to misremember the point of the story and filter it in such a way that it ends up strengthening their view.
Now, let's sort of stay on politics for one moment, because I'm wondering, some of the techniques that you use in magic acts, do you think that politicians and advertisers use some of those same tricks?
Absolutely. One of the easiest examples is the ability for a good politician to present themselves as a blank canvas upon which people can project whatever it is they want to see. And so likewise with magic, you want to carefully phrase your words in a way that allows people to interpret them, possibly intentionally leading them down a path that you choose not to take later, but at the very least allow them to fill in the gaps, present them with A, B, C, and E, and just let them assume that D was always there. I think we see a lot of that with certainly the skillful politicians out there.
Yeah, and people also are programmed to believe what others say to them, and that's mostly a feature, not a bug. It's unnatural to consider the idea that someone can actually look you in the eye and be lying. And this is something that works to the advantage of magicians. Again, I think this is actually a good thing in human nature in the long run, but it is one of the reasons that if magicians have any lesson to offer, it is that anyone, literally anyone, can be fooled. And the moment you think that you are the exception, you're just waiting to latch on to somebody's baited hook.
You're tuned in to Skeptically Speaking. Today's topic is magic and critical thinking. And my guests are magicians Jamy Ian Swiss and Brian Brushwood. And we'll be right back with more after this.
On the next episode of Skeptically Speaking, we'll get the scientific perspective on the causes and effects of aging and how they change over a lifetime. We'll speak with Dr. Nir Barzilay, director of the Institute for Aging Research at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, about the biology and genetics of aging. And we're joined by Professor Diana Koo to discuss her work as the head of the UK's National Survey for Health and Development. That's next week on Skeptically Speaking on your local radio station or online at skepticallyspeaking.com.
Welcome back to Skeptically Speaking. I'm your host, Desiree Schell. And today we're asking professional magicians how the study and practice of magic can help teach critical thinking skills. My guests are Jamy Ian Swiss, international speaker and the co-producer of Monday Night Magic, New York City's longest-running off-Broadway magic show, and Brian Brushwood, creator and host of the very popular Scam School video podcast. So I've heard it said that magicians are really good at finding flaws in the way that some types of experiments are designed. Have you guys heard that?
I just heard it right now from you, and I agree 100%.
Well, why is that?
Because we spend our entire lives looking for ways to game things, and magic is a weird stepchild of a very naughty family of street con artists, of gamblers and cheats and liars, of manipulators. And we're the one guys who have a heart of gold, but we still have that desire to look for all the ways that we could be cheating on just about anything. Would you agree with that, Jamy?
Yes, magicians have a basic toolkit, as Brian points out, that is focused on deception and its infinite methods. And I'm not sure that magicians have expertise to offer in terms of conventional science. I mean, the message of magicians has to do more with science where there is a likelihood of deception being a part of things. When you're looking at phony psychics, which is a redundancy, who, whether it was during the age of spirit mediums or contemporarily, there you have a likelihood of deception occurring. And the message of magicians from the time of Houdini to the present, I've tried to say to the parapsychology community, is if you want to study something where there's a high risk of deception, it takes one detachment. Unfortunately, what often happens is that academics think that because they have academic or scientific training, somehow this protects them against deception, and it doesn't. It doesn't at all. The average academic or scientist is just as much as any other audience member that I have is someone I'm going to fool with magic, because deception is a particular specific expertise, and it is not part of the typical scientist's course of study, for example, because no one ever concerns himself about a sneaky amoeba. Microbes don't call a meeting on the side and says, hey, let's fool the big guy. Deception is a very narrow and special kind of expertise, and when deception is a likely risk, this is where you need magicians in particular. Now, that's not to say deception doesn't occur in science, but I'm not sure that magicians are necessarily experts to look at all kinds. I mean, there is such a thing as faulty science. You might have, look at cold fusion, for example, Pons and Fleischmann, and this is a case of so-called pathological science, but there are warning signs there. And by the way, I would also add here that cold fusion is sometimes cited as an example of a failure of science. It's actually the opposite. It's a perfect example of the success and effectiveness of science, because when the cold fusion claims came out, what happened was there wasn't a whole lot of Sturm und Drang about it. What basically happened was researchers around the world said, oh, that's interesting, let's see if we can replicate that. They failed to replicate their results rather quickly, and it got shoved aside, and science moves on. But there were already warnings of pathological science present, because first of all, you had two chemists who were making claims outside of their specialty in physics. They announced their results at a press conference as opposed to in a refereed journal, and we go on from there. So there is deception that does occur in other areas of science, but I'm not sure that magicians are the ones to necessarily apply special expertise there.
Now, we have just a ridiculous number of audience questions that have piled up, so I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. This one is from Skeptic Sam. Jamy, I remember reading your Swift blog post about Psi researcher Daryl Bem and the paper he published that he claimed demonstrated precognition. You were distinctly unconvinced. What would convince you that someone had psychic powers?
Well, I think any compelling proof. I mean, I don't think it should be all that difficult to demonstrate. If we put you in a blinded situation and we shuffle up a deck of cards and ask one party as a sender to look at a card, and the next party separated from him to act as a receiver and write down what the card is, or even whether it's red or black, it's pretty easy to tell if they're going to beat the prediction of a chance outcome, of a 50-50 outcome, right? That's not hard. So, but the problem is, what often happens, and what has happened over the past several decades, for example, in parapsychology, is that they find some statistical aberrancy that's usually very, very small, often is not what was being looked for in the first place, but it's sort of found after the fact, so you're kind of moving the goal and changing the definition of what a success even is, or what the so-called power or effect is that you're looking for. And it's extremely small. And the idea that it's extremely small is actually important, because one of the problems with parapsychology, the claims of parapsychology, is that they don't fit into any coherent structure or mechanism that is currently known in science. Now, that does not rule it out entirely. It certainly does not rule it out entirely as being capable of existing. That's very often in science. We sometimes discover a phenomenon, we don't discover the explanation or the mechanism until later. But by the same token, science tends to be coherent, which is to say that, a discovery in biology over here somehow adds a piece to the puzzle that then some other discovery in physics or chemistry seems to piece together. It adds to the puzzle and broadens our picture. Well, this doesn't really happen in parapsychology, because there's no even proposed mechanisms for how things like precognition or psychokinesis or telepathy or clairvoyance, how these things could even work. And because there's no known mechanism that is even remotely coherent with anything else that we know about science, then simply for the fact that you find some odd so-called effect, some statistical anomaly in an effect, is not sufficient proof of the paranormal by itself. You actually have to raise the standard somewhat and show me something that's really going to be unmistakably significant, unmistakably statistically significant, or you got to give me some kind of mechanism where it fits. And parapsychology so far consistently fails to do either. So the fact that there's some bizarre little statistical anomaly, if a number of researchers duplicate that work, replicate that work, then okay, that will be something too. But one researcher who has been long looking for things along these lines, the bottom line here is, if you look at parapsychology in the 150 years or so of its history, the number of paradigmatic experiments that occur in psychology, that we have in psychology, that a psychology 101 student can just replicate the experiment, replicate the results in a predictable way, just like a basic chemistry or biology experiment. We have many of those sort of paradigmatic experiments. The number of paradigmatic experiments that parapsychology has provided with us to date, that number is 0. And at best, what happens is we find a claim for a while. Everyone in the parapsychology world jumps up and down. Oh, here it is. Here's the smoking gun. Here's the evidence. Here's the missing link. And then 20 years goes by, and nobody wants to talk about that anymore because it's flawed. There's some problem. There's bias. There's a failure in procedure. There's this and that. Nobody can replicate it. Now we move on to the next one. So, I'll wait here. It could happen tomorrow.
Right.
Apples could begin to fall up tomorrow. But, when I got to get a catcher's mitt to catch them, I'll worry about it then.
We have a question from the website. It's from Naomi Littlewood. What do you think is the primary difference of motivation between a magician such as yourselves and one such as Criss Angel, in the degree to which you suggest to the audience that your powers lie in the paranormal? Sometimes Angel reveals the mechanics of what he's doing, like when he's cold reading. Sometimes he seems to portray his abilities as supernatural, like when he's floating. What's the motivation for deception?
Criss is in a real tough position because when you're at the top of Mount Olympus, there are things that you want to do, and then there's things that you need to do to keep your position at the top of Mount Olympus. And certainly, what sells and what makes ratings is maybe some kind of editing hint that and maybe it's real, that kind of thing. And and first of all, let me be clear, I have no idea what the breakdown is between what Criss wants to do and what actually ends up showing up on the show. I know a lot of times you get into fighting matches between your editor, between your director, between your network about what you want to convey and what they end up putting on there. And like many politicians, you have to make compromises from time to time. I do know that Criss Angel, is definitely a skeptic, and he definitely promotes skeptical values. And in fact, on Phenomenon, the NBC television show, he ended up getting in a screaming match, which is actually really interesting to watch if you can find the clip on YouTube, with somebody about the nature of the downside of convincing people that you actually have psychic powers. And now, as to why he runs the show the way he does, well, I suspect it's because it's the type of decisions that end up making it a top show on A&E. And so it's like if I knew the exact whys of that balance, then it would be Brian Brushwood, Mind Weird, on A&E instead.
I have another question for you, actually, Brian. Now, this is from Jim Curtino. Hey, Brian, I hung out with you and my friend Seth Rovner in Philly. When you perform as a magician, you're messing with people's perceptions. After your shows, do you feel people leave more skeptical or actually believing in magic?
That's a really good question. I think I make it pretty clear during my stage show what I believe. In fact, there's at least 2 or 3 times that I flatly state, by the way, I totally don't believe in any kind of ESP whatsoever. And I think that's honest and right. But having said that, it would be distracting to watch an entire performance of Hamlet and every 3 minutes have someone say, like, by the way, totally not Hamlet. I'm an actor. All right. And so at some point you have to accept the conventions of what we're doing. And so my show is very over the top, and I draw from a lot of comic book imagery. I don't talk about having ESP. I say I'm reading minds, because I'm like, Professor X, or, when I break a brick over my head, I'm like, I'm strong like the Hulk, that kind of thing. And so at the end of the show, to me, the distinction is I say we're doing an experiment in ESP, that kind of thing, and it's surprising and interesting when it turns out to be right, and it's genuinely awesome. But the mark of a good guy versus a bad guy is when the show is over and they're like, seriously, how did you do that? A bad guy will say, well, I did it with my ESP powers. And a good guy will be like, isn't that a great trick? I came up with that 3 years ago. I'm so proud of it. And they're like, oh, so it's not real? No, it's totally not real. That's the difference is when you're on stage, you are a character performing a part. When you are off stage, you are a person. And when a person looks you in the eye and tries to take credit for something supernatural, you are a bad person. And so with that in mind, that's one of the things that we're trying so hard to do with Scam School is it's one thing. I know a lot of magicians are like, well, I showed you that I can fool you. Now go forth and know that you could be fooled. And but the problem is that doesn't stick with people. And even when they do get fooled later, they don't think they have because it's in our core beliefs that we think that we're better than being fooled. Whereas with Scam School, it's not just that I'm fooling you. It's like, I'm fooled you. And now here's how you can fool your friends.
Right.
And it's only when you go out and you experience the power of deceiving other people that you truly comprehend, wow, everybody can be fooled, even me. This is insane.
Now, I actually have a question that's sort of a follow-up. And I think we don't really discuss politics on the show. We do that very much on purpose. But I would like to ask, some people are pushing for stricter regulations for the claims that alternative health products can make. So do you think that things like professional psychics should be regulated?
Well, as a libertarian, the answer, the problem is whenever you involve the government, you introduce an opportunity for corruption. When you put the power in the hands of some bureaucrat who has an agenda that's not the agenda of the people out there, then you run into trouble. The way it should be handled is the way it's starting to handle itself right now. The internet is the freest exchange of information in the entire world. And all you have to do is Google acupuncture to get some surprising statistics about what is and isn't supported. All you have to do is Google chiropractic to find out what is and isn't true about chiropractic. And with that being the case, the solution is we should have a more educated public, and it should be a free exchange of ideas. It should not be that you involve the government to say, okay, well, your government says that this is real medicine, and your government says this is not medicine, because that's how you end up with the idiocy that we see over in China, where people are flying over here.
In other words, we will have no consumer protection whatsoever. Every man for himself, buyer beware, and every individual is just up to his own little powers, whatever he can do up against corporations that are now considered citizens by the Supreme Court.
I don't think that's what I said.
I disagree with that. Well, those murder laws, they don't always work either, but I guess we shouldn't have them because when the government gets involved,
Pretty sure I didn't say that either.
And actually, we are pretty much out of time. I think we could do multi-part episodes on this topic. But thanks very much for being here, guys.
Thanks very much for having us. A pleasure, Desiree.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be selling pay-per-view tickets for the cage match later on. Jamy Ian Swiss, Brian Brushwood.
That's a hell of a fundraising idea. You can find links to Jamy Ian Swiss and Brian Brushwood on our website at skepticallyspeaking.com. While you're there, do click the links to Facebook, to Twitter, and to iTunes, where you can subscribe to the show, listen to past episodes, or leave a review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on Skeptically Speaking.
Bring it on, the skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell, gonna raise a little hell, break the spell of Pavlov's spells. Cause we're skeptically speaking, our mind reading tarot cards and witches, psychics, and their spoon-bending mind tricks. All the humbug, flim-flam, frauds and shams, the charlatan who I don't think you understand. It's the hocus-pocus, out-of-focus locus, eroding the brain, making gains on the hopeless. Let the crystal ball fall, smash on the floor, leave the pieces alone. We don't need them anymore, just a microscope, telescope, magnifier, reading in between the lines of these lies. Bring it on, the skeptics await your letter. Your call, tweet, homing, pigeon, whatever. Desiree Shell, gonna raise a little hell, metaphorically that is, cause we're skeptically speaking.
Skeptically Speaking is produced with the support of CJSR 88.5 FM in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Our studio assistants are Brent Kelly and Lisa Skovanek. Ryan Bromsgrove is our studio technician and research assistant. The show is produced and edited by K.O. Myers. Our theme song was written and recorded by A.O.K. And I'm your host, Desiree Schell.